Welcome back to Sober Counsel. My name is Malcolm MacDonald, and this is the series where we're talking about topics of interest in corporate IT. And today I'm going to be circling back to the very first topic that we spoke of, where I mentioned business analysis and the process by which business analysis should be done in a business to get the maximum value for the analysis work. And today I'm going to be talking about a couple of tools that a business analyst should be using. And these are really very, very simple, and if you're not using these, you really haven't started doing business analysis yet. But I find that many business analysts, the best business analysts that I've met, are intuitive. They just understand what it is to do business analysis. And so maybe you're one of those who just intuitively know the right questions to ask and the right level of inquisitiveness to have, but you haven't seen these tools before, and this might be of use to you. Also, sometimes maybe you've been in the business for so long, around the block, and these things are old and forgotten, and it's just refreshing to see these tools can add value in day-to-day business analysis work. So these are really, really old tools, and they're still extremely valuable, and they are, of course, the entity relationship diagram, the ERD, and a use case diagram from the UML process. And so without further ado, I'm just going to jump across to a diagram where we'll just unpack this and work through a little quick example to show how a entity relationship diagram and a use case diagram work. Now, you may wonder where the entity relationship diagram got its name from, and of course that is because there are a number of components in an entity relationship diagram. One of them, of course, being an entity, another one being a relationship, and in case you couldn't have guessed it, the third one is an attribute that belongs to an entity. And so as we work through this quick little example, I'm going to talk about maybe a hypothetical internet service provider that has got some internet service products, like some bandwidth that they can sell, and they are looking for some clients to sell them to. And when they sell the product to that client, they use a contract to do that. And so if you're interrogating the business and you're asking them, well, what is this thing? How do we, what is it that we're selling? They might start with product. And there's some lines connecting to this product. So just for convenience, I've connected them beforehand. So that'll appear, what they're connected to will appear as we go forward. But we have this product that is then sold to a client, and what I've done is I've called that the client holds a product. Now the way you read this, I've put some arrows on these lines, so this client holds a product, and so you read it in the direction of the arrow. There's typically a relationship in both directions, and if it's possible to word it in such a way that the relationship reads in both directions, then that's great, but very often you need to read the relationship in a particular direction. In this case, the client holds a product, not the product holds a client. In the reverse direction, it would be that the product is held by a client. The next element that we've mentioned is the contract, and the contract is something that binds the client. So a client is bound by a contract. They have to live by the terms in that contract. Now, just to show some attributes here, we have there's one more relationship we haven't spoken of yet, which is that the product implements or instantiates, the contract instantiates a product. So a product is just some description and some words on a piece of paper. And when you have a contract, then you've actually got one that is in the real world and actually exists. So the attributes that we might need to know about these various things for a client, we obviously need to know more than just an outstanding balance, but an address, bank account details for billings, and so on and so on. I've just put that outstanding balance there in this example. For a contract, we need to know various things: the inception date, what is the term of this contract? What is the contract period? How often do we bill? What amount do we bill? What billing method do we use? Is it a credit card? Is it PayPal? Is it debit order? What date do we bill on? And so on and so on. So there's a number of attributes that we need to know about this contract. And then from a product perspective, well, obviously the description of the product, what is the product, what is the pricing of the product, and maybe there's some discount rules or any other rules that pertain to the product that you want to know about. Now, the important thing here is that as a business analyst, you're asking questions. You want to understand these things. You want to know, well, what are all the details that I need to understand about a contract? What are all the details that I need to understand about a client? Are there other entities in this relationship? It's not just these three, surely. There must be more entities in this relationship, and digging with the business to find out what that is and how this unfolds and how this unpacks, so that you can get the best possible detail on how to build a system that is going to implement this business. Now, this is a very simplistic example, and if you really want to know a lot more about entity relationship diagrams, there are a number of videos on YouTube and other places that you can go to find out a whole lot more detail about exactly how, where, and when all of these components are to be used. However, there's one more element here. It's called cardinality that I want to talk about, and that says how many entities are involved in this relationship. And so if you look at this particular example here, there's a little 1. That's not a line, it's a 1. And there's multiple lines indicating many. And here's a little 0, another one indicating many. So what this means is I can have a product. If I have a product, that can be linked to 0 or more clients. If I have a client, that can be linked to 1 or more products. Now, why is that different? Well, in theory, this person is not a client unless they have 1 product. But a product can exist that you've never sold to anyone yet, and therefore it belongs to 0 clients. So in this direction, your relationship could have 0 clients holding that product or many. And in this direction, the way you would read it is you would say this client can have 1 or more products. And similarly, this line indicating this double 1 here, 1, 1, indicates 1 and only 1. Now, what does that mean? In this definition that we've used for this system, we're saying that a contract can be for 1 and only 1 product. You wouldn't have a contract for 0 products. You wouldn't have a product in this particular example. I mean, theoretically, you can have a contract for multiple products. But in this particular example, I'm saying that you can only have a contract for 1 product, and therefore a contract can exist only for 1 and only 1 product. It couldn't exist for 0 products because you would never have a contract for 0 products. In the other direction, a product can have many, many contracts that are instantiating that product. Similarly, with the client, you wouldn't have a contract for 0 clients. You would always have a contract for at least one and only 1 client. You wouldn't have, in this case, multiple people signing the contract. So you have 1 client and only 1 client for a contract, but you could have 1 or more contracts for a client. You can have multiple products. So that's how you read cardinality. It's also a very important element in designing a system, because you really need to know how those relationships play out in terms of sizing and designing your database. Now, to move quickly along to the use case diagram, it's got a very, very different purpose. And this is more about how the system will be used as opposed to how the data in the system will relate to each other. And to do a use case diagram, we've got some components again. We've got a system, and a system has a number of use cases in it. And then we have actors, and an actor may use a use case, or there's another type of relationship that a use case might have with another use case, and that is that it might extend a use case. So we may see that a little later in this explanation. But for now, I want to say, well, let's take the previous example and just simply flesh out how this might look. So we might have a sales system, and we're going to get a quote from that sales system and then purchase a product. And the user, or the actor in this particular case, will be this client. This client is going to use the system to get a quote, and this client is going to use the system to purchase a product. Now, what happens after that? Well, now we have our contract admin system, where if we make this purchase, we're going to activate a contract. And well, there's another 2 use cases in here that you can see probably are not appropriate for the client themselves. You might have self-service so they can manage contract changes, but in this example, I will show that we've got a call center agent who's going to manage contract changes for the client. And then if we move on to the last piece of the example that I'm going to talk about today, we may have a billing system. And this billing system must bill active contracts. And how is it going to do that? Well, the contract admin system, it must supply some information on the billing details for all the active contracts. And in our entity relationship diagram, you now may notice that there's an attribute that we need to add, which would be the status of a contract. Is it an active contract or is it a terminated contract? And that would be necessary in order for this contract admin system to give the list of details for active contracts to the billing system. And then the last user in this example, I'm going to say that the finance department here is going to use this billing system to reconcile billings. So again, you can see that as a business analyst, there's a lot more questions that I haven't asked today that you will need to ask in order to be able to create a complete and a proper system using these tools. But these are very, very simple tools and very, very powerful in terms of creating a shared view of what is meant. So when we draw these things together, there's a lot less ambiguity in what the system needs to do, who's going to use the system, how the system will fit together, what the functionality of the system will be. We've reduced that ambiguity quite significantly by drawing these diagrams together and actually just articulating in a very understandable way between the business users, the developers, and the analysts exactly what is meant by the discussion that is held at the analysis workshops, where we're trying to understand what the business needs for their system. So I hope that's been very useful to you. If nothing else, maybe just quick refresher on the power of these little tools in creating a shared view of what the requirement is. Next time, I will most likely be talking about board reporting and how you might use various tools to report to the board in a way that is interesting to the board and is actually useful to the board. Very often I've seen technical reporting to the board which is, well, either not of interest or not understandable to a board member in a typical setting. And unless, some of your board members are very deeply technical, telling them, what the APIs do and how many system changes you've made, etc., may not be of interest. Of course, that one may be of interest, but I think that there's a way of reporting to a board, and we'll discuss that next time. So have a great week, and I shall see you next time.